But we're going to kind of keep things rolling along. So, who am I? Hi, I'm Steve, and I've done a lot of different stuff in education. I've been an educator since 1998. I've been student-facing, classroom-based since 1998. I've got a couple of different degrees in a couple of different areas in education, so I've got a little bit of a different perspective on stuff. And it was very surprising to me when I was getting my school library certificate how little I knew about information literacy and news literacy. As an English teacher, I felt like I had a really good handle on those concepts. And yet, when I actually got into the instruction of school librarianship, I started to see there was a lot of gaps in my knowledge. So I have come to realize how important information literacy is. And we're going to talk about news literacy kind of mostly today, but news literacy is just one element of information literacy. And information literacy is basically those skills and practices that help us ethically and responsibly find, use, create, and share information. So we want our students doing all of those things, and we've got to think about how we're going to help them get used to it. Because let's face it, all of us are in an information-focused world. If this does not look like your living room at night, I'm surprised, because this is exactly what my living room looks like at night. We've got the TV on, we've got at least 2 different devices going, plus our phones are nearby. There's always more stuff to look at, and there's always more stuff to do. And we even are in an information-based economy. And I mean that both in the sense that we want to know how to use information in our economy, but also we literally now have money that is made of information. That's what cryptocurrency is. It's money made of information. So think about what that means. There's so much information around us. Our students are surrounded, and it's kind of like
you get to drink from the fire hose!
It's just, there's too much. There's so much out there, and we know it. So we've got to think about the fact that after reading and math, information literacy is probably our most important skill that we can teach our students. It's literally baked into their lives on a daily basis. And one thing that I grew up hearing a lot was everyone is entitled to their opinion. And I would say that in the past 15 years, 10 years, we've seen a little bit of a shift where opinions have started to take the place of facts, and where people are talking about their opinion as alternative facts. And so we've got to think very carefully about accepting people's opinions and think more about how do we focus on factual information. How do we know beyond these things that news literacy and information literacy are important? Well, look at how many different states now have legislation mandating media literacy of some kind. This is media literacy, not necessarily information literacy, but we've got 21 states that have some sort of mandate for students to learn about information literacy. Clearly, if half the country feels like this is something that's important for our students to know, it's got to be kind of a big deal. And I'm sure that we're going to see other states jump on that too. Now, New Jersey, where I live, happens to be the first state in the nation to pass information literacy specific standards for its students. And we're in the process of actually creating those now. I'm fortunate enough to be helping to create those, and it's really interesting and amazing, and I can't wait for them to get here. And we know now that it's important. We can see that it's important, but maybe why do we think it's so important? Well, one thing that boggles my mind, I saw this study a while back that approximately 80% of our students, three out of 4, turn to social media when they are studying to find information, to locate information. In other words, they're going to social media for their information needs. That alone is troubling, because we all know social media has some issues. But even going beyond that, other research shows that kids and teens spend an average of 91 minutes a day watching TikTok. And this is from 2022. So that number might have changed some, but I think it's a good starting point. Let's think about what that means. An average of 91 minutes a day. I once asked one of my classes, how much TikTok do you guys watch? And they said 0. So that means there's some kids out there that are watching 3 hours a day instead of an hour and a half to keep that average, right? there's a lot of TikTok that kids are getting exposed to. What does that mean? Well, we have some ideas of what it means, I think, as educators and adults, but I'm not sure that our students do. So I think we've got to consider what they know about the internet. And somebody reminded me about this commercial recently that kind of hits on this, and I think it's kind of funny. So let's take a quick.
Oh, hey, Mike. What are you up to?
Just diagramming this accident with my State Farm Pocket Agent app. You can also get a quote and pay your premium with this thing.
I thought State Farm didn't have all those apps.
Where'd you hear that?
The internet.
And you believed it?
Yeah. They can't put anything on the internet that isn't true.
Where'd you hear that? The internet.
Oh, look. Here comes my date. I met him on the internet. He's a French model.
Bonjour.
State Farm, more mobile than ever. Get to a better state.
Unfortunately, I think we do have students out there who are not aware that everything on the internet is not necessarily true. And I think in some cases they may intellectually be able to tell us that, but there's absolutely a regular use of the internet by them for their information needs. And they don't necessarily think about where they're getting that information beyond the internet and beyond the fact that some stuff on the internet may be true and other stuff may be not. We've got to help them kind of ground that understanding a bit. And somebody also recently showed me this video that blew my mind. So the Secretary of State in Arizona recently did a training for the people working on election security in his state. And let's just check out a little snippet here.
Hello, this is a public service advisory featuring an AI version of Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes. This video was produced as part of our 2024 statewide election security tabletop exercise. It was created with both the consent and cooperation of the real Secretary Fontes, which again is not me. I'm an AI impersonation of him.
Ooh, Mr.
That is kind of scary because then there's an interview with him and it's really almost impossible to tell the difference between the AI version of him and the real version of him. And that was his point, is that we are now living in an age when we can not only trick our eyes, we can trick our ears, we can trick, like, what we see is no longer what we can believe. So we've got to think carefully about how we're helping our students understand a lot of these very basic and very important ideas about the information they're taking in. And here's the thing, we're talking about doing this for students, but information literacy isn't just for kids. This is something that adults need to be aware of too, because as we saw, information literacy can literally make the difference between life and death in certain situations. Knowing what information is correct and what information isn't can truly cost a person their life. You've probably heard about the litter box story that wouldn't die. This continues to circulate. I literally heard somebody talk about this yesterday. This story that because of pronoun use, there's a school that has students who identify as cats, and therefore the school has litter boxes in the bathrooms for them to use instead of regular toilets. And this story keeps coming up as sort of a fear-mongering attempt at getting rid of this idea of letting kids self-identify and letting kids use the pronouns that fit them and letting kids choose the name that works for them. And it keeps circulating around and around and around, even though it has been repeatedly shown to have been started as a hoax or as a sort of a satire. But actual real congressional members keep citing this story as some reason that we need to think more about how we're treating our students, which I think is a big problem. And I mean, just recently, in the past week, we've seen how much information literacy matters with the many things that are going on with this election cycle. I mean, it's, as someone said the other day, please, can I live in precedented times again? We've got to help our students be aware of all the different ways that people are going to try and get them to click on stuff, whether it's malicious or whether it's for economic reasons or whether it's just to be trolls. We've got to help them understand that. So, okay, we know why it's important. We know where it's important. What might this look like? It can be something really simple. I love charts and graphs and infographics, and somebody showed me this chart a while back. And when I was looking at this, the first time it was shown to me, I'm looking at this and I said, okay, well, so in 2005, Florida enacted its Stand Your Ground law, which basically says, if you feel threatened, you are allowed to shoot the person that you feel is threatening you. And so you look at the chart and it says they enacted it in 2005, and then all of a sudden, boom, that line goes down. Clearly, stand your ground law works. And then the person who showed me this graph originally said, okay, now look a little closer, and you're going to see that the axis is actually upside down from what we would traditionally expect. So actually, stand your ground, when it passed, caused murders committed using firearms to go up significantly, a huge amount, almost a 100% increase. So with that in mind, I noticed that the source is the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. And I said, so is the Florida Department of Law Enforcement trying to trick me into thinking their law is working better than maybe it is? And this was circulated through Reuters, which I know is a reliable source of information. So I figure, okay, I've got this. I understand what's going on here. Somebody's trying to trick me using data. Not that long ago, I actually learned that this graphic was created by an author who was trying to point out how terrible the stand your ground law is, and they were trying to depict dripping blood. That's why they flipped it upside down. That's why they colored it with red, so that it has this more artistic effect. Now, not knowing that piece of information led me to an incorrect understanding of who is putting this information out and why. And before that, not looking carefully at the data led me to an incorrect understanding of what the data actually was. So this one graphic has a lot of different stories that it's telling if we only look at it once quickly on our way through a story. So we've got to help our students realize there's a lot of times more going on than just what it seems on the surface. So I would argue there's two main important catchwords we've got to think about when it comes to information literacy and news literacy: context and perspective. I think it really all boils down to those two words, because if we've got those two things in mind when we're looking at information, that lays the groundwork for everything else. So context, there's a great little clip here from the Scooby-Doo movie, actually Scooby-Doo 2, that kind of gives a really clear understanding, I think, for students of why context matters.
With all your success, are you still going to have time for all of us here in little old Coolsville?
Of course, little old Coolsville can solve its problems without us, but we'll always be here to help. The people of Coolsville are the best in the world!
When asked for comment, Fred Jones, leader of Mystery Incorporated, had this to say.
Little old Coolsville can solve its problems without us. I didn't say that.
And I guess little old Coolsville
I did,
will have
but
to.
that's out of
Heather
context.
Jasper Howe. So what you're saying is, it's all downhill for Mystery Inc.
No. Hey, you're doing that thing again where you take everything I say out of context. You're trying to make it look like I think Coolsville sucks. No, don't record that.
All Fred Jones had to say was,
I think Coolsville sucks.
in light of the city's recent chaos.
It's kind of silly, but it really does capture that idea of it's very easy for all sorts of actors to take information out of context and present it so that it seems to be saying something different than what it really is. The other thing we've got to think about is perspective. And I love these graphics. There's actually a series of them, and this is the first and the last one. So we can look at something from one particular perspective, and it might seem to be one thing. And someone looking at that same issue from a different perspective might see it a different way than us. And the thing is, one perspective or the other isn't necessarily the whole truth. That's why we've got to think about what is our perspective on the situation and what's the bigger context that our perspective is part of. Because the fact of the matter is, a lot of times we say there's two sides to, or three sides to every story: yours, mine, and the truth. But the fact is, there's actually usually a lot more than just two sides. Depending on where you're standing, depending on what your perspective is, you might see things very differently than someone who's looking at the same exact situation as you, because they're looking at it from a different perspective. So we've got to kind of consciously raise our perspective to that place where we're thinking about, like, what are my biases? What are my thoughts? Where am I situated in relation to this story? And how is that going to affect how I see it and how others see it? Trained journalists have reporting standards. And the thing is, the guy yelling about things he hates doesn't. The person on the internet that is just, I'm not going to start naming names, but there's lots of names out there that I'm sure I could name that you would go, oh yeah, I've heard of them. if they're not a professional journalist, they're not bound by journalistic ethics. They can do or say pretty much whatever they want. And I don't think students understand that that's an important distinction to make between media and non-media. And even within media, even with journalistic standards, even with journalistic training, there's bias in reporting. And that's going to, unfortunately, always be the case. It is not possible for media to bring us the entire story from every perspective and every piece of context that we need to completely understand it. They are limited by time and space to only give us certain parts of the story. That's an unfortunate reality. We've got to be aware of it. And I don't think that means that media is purposely trying to trick us, but we've got to be aware that media does have biases and that it's only bringing us parts of the story. We've got to think about, do I need other parts to truly understand this? Do I need different perspectives to truly see the whole story? Now, I know you know that school librarians are specifically trained in teaching information literacy across the curriculum. I was doing a presentation on this same topic last week for some teachers, and they were kind of looking at me like, oh, thank goodness there's somebody who can help me understand all this stuff and share this stuff. Because let's face it, teachers have a lot on their plates. They've already got a full curriculum, and trying to add information literacy and media literacy on top of it, that can be a real tough sell. But we are there to be able to collaborate, to offer ideas, to offer assistance. So with that in mind, I also want to point out that so much of our student interactions take place online these days, and screens allow depersonalization and anonymity. And in some ways that can be a positive, but in other ways, psychologically, it can be a big negative. Because when we depersonalize and when we are able to be anonymous, it's much easier to become a troll. It's much easier to be abusive. It's much easier to spread incorrect information without concerns for the consequences when we are anonymous and when we are depersonalizing both the person on the other end and ourselves by mediating it all through a screen or a device. So we've got to bear that in mind. And I think that brings us to the point that good digital citizenship includes news literacy and information literacy, because we need to be able to differentiate between reliable and unreliable sources. We need to have good click hygiene. We're not just clicking repost all the time. We're not just automatically upvoting, or we're not just automatically forwarding things, right? We've got to think about, what am I clicking on and why am I clicking it? We've got to think about, are sources cited in the things we're sharing? Am I citing my sources when I share information? When we do those things, those are good digital citizenship practices, and they lead to fewer cases of misinformation. So that's a lot of stuff for us to deal with. That's a lot of stuff for us to have on our plates. So here are some resources that maybe can help you to deal with this and help your teachers to deal with this. For a while, I got to write and then teach basically an information literacy skills class. It was called Argument and Debate, and I did a whole bunch of lessons for it. It met basically 40 times for one marking period. All the seventh graders had to take it. So over the course of a year, I saw all the seventh graders, and they all had these skills by the end of it. And so there's 40 plus different lessons already set up. They go in order. They're slide decks with links to related materials. You click that link, Steve's Secret Information Literacy Skills class, and there they are. They were written for middle school, but I think they absolutely could apply to, I wrote them for seventh graders, but they could absolutely apply for slightly younger grades and definitely for older grades. Depending on how you approach stuff, you could even expand on a lot of that stuff, or you could simplify some of it for even lower grades. Here's one particular lesson that was part of the regular rotation. It's now an X lesson, which was a lesson I started with and then ended up finding I didn't really have time for, so it's sort of a spare. But reverse image searching. If you're not aware, it's incredibly easy in Google Chrome browser to right-click on an image and choose search image, and it will find you that image or similar kinds of images. Now, this particular example that's on the screen right here, this is from a national media outlet that will remain unnamed that was reporting on child soldiers, and they used this image of child soldiers in Africa to support their reporting. But if you reverse image search on this picture, it's actually a video game clip. They took a picture from a video game without realizing it, and used it as part of their reporting on a real issue. This happens. That's why it's important for us to think about where are these images coming from, and are they actually the images that they purport to be, right? So that's one of the lessons that you can check out in all these lessons. Another really useful resource is the News Literacy Project. If you're not already using them, you absolutely should check them out. Full disclosure, I'm a News Literacy Project ambassador. I love this resource. I always feel like a little bit of a shill when I start talking about them, but they are so good. Even before I was an ambassador, I was using them because they have free materials. They are a nonprofit that's supported by a very generous endowment, and they have very high quality, useful materials. They're online, they're free. You can use them in a lot of different scenarios. They even will fit into different specific subject areas. So it doesn't have to just be a library thing. They've got science strands, they've got social studies strands, they've got ELA strands. They've got a weekly free email called the SIFT. The SIFT alone is worth signing up for, because the SIFT comes with, here is their archive. We can see a whole bunch of different ones. Let me just let me scroll down a little bit here and just grab one for, great, the solar eclipse. So this is a typical newsletter that they'll send you once a week. It starts with usually some sort of debunking of a viral image that's going around. And it includes explanations of why they've got the picture there and what it's from, with links to information about the news that this is related to. And they've got resources that you can use, and they've got related information that's related to that story, right? That alone could be a lesson, right? And then if we scroll down further, they've got other topics that are in the current news that they've got links to for resources and related information, right? So they've got several of those. Then they've got the Rumor Guard Rundown, which I love. They take a viral image every week and they highlight, here's why this is not what people are purporting that it is. So they're bringing you, here is something right now that is going around as a viral image that's not true. And then they go through very specifically what's wrong about it and what, if anything, is right about it. And they also give you links to further resources if you need them, right? And then they've got a couple of those. Sometimes they do one, sometimes they've got a couple, and they will, again, break it down piece by piece. Here's why this is not actually true. And one of the things I do like is, if you look really carefully at the image, they've watermarked it all over the place so that no one can distribute their copy of the image, the News Literacy Project copy of the image, as incorrect information. And they've got kickers, which are some little discussion topics that you can use with links to further resources. Again, this is all just the weekly newsletter that they send you for free. They've also got interactive online lessons that you can assign to students. So you can say, hey, students, I want you to work on this unit. And they go on the computer, they can go right to it. It's got videos, it's got interactive quizzes, it's got different types of text and different ways of interacting with the information. It's great. They also have free webinars and events. They've got lots of stuff, including, I went the wrong way, hang on, including great downloadable graphics that you can print out and put up wherever you want to put them up. This one just came out, breaking news. With all the stuff that's been going on, they took a minute to take their breaking news checklist and they turned it into an infographic that you can print and put up wherever you need it. They also did a special edition of their newsletter after the assassination attempt to debunk some of the misinformation that was going around. So that's some of the News Literacy Project stuff. There's also a bunch of different games that your students can play online. Some of these are my students just could not get enough of. I had to drag them away from them. Bad News was a particularly popular one, where you pretend that you were trying to set up a misinformation empire on a social media network, and it walks you through, here's how you do that. So they're playing the role of the bad guy and seeing, here's how bad guys do this. Here's how people manipulate information to get more likes online that they can monetize or whatever it might be. So there's a couple of different versions of some different games there. One resource I love that you've got to be a little careful with, but it's really cool, Science Versus. It's a podcast. It's every week. They've been out for a couple of seasons now, so they've got a good back catalog. It deals with current issues from a scientific perspective, and it looks at what's in the news these days that is scientifically related. And they go and talk to experts in the fields to get actual real information about these topics that it can be very controversial. what I love is that the end of each episode, they call out how many citations did we have in this week's episode? And it's usually 70 or above. Often it's above 100. And you can see, here is our list of citations. So you can go to the research they used to support their points, which I think is a really great, even if you don't use the episodes themselves, the structure of the episodes, I think is really useful. One thing I would suggest though, preview the episodes for language and content. These are not made for kids. They are, if I was going to use these, I'd use them with like the top of my 9-12 range, and I would still be a little selective about what I chose. Here's a couple that maybe would be really good to use. Although again, sometimes the host has some blue language, but protein, that's something that's been coming up a lot on social media lately. So they brought it up as a topic, like what are the actual scientific reasons for why we do or don't, and what actually works and what doesn't. Trans kids healthcare, that's been coming up a lot. And this one I found really interesting because it starts out going in one direction with research and then takes a turn, and they use different research to say, but here's something else to think about. And it really was a thought provoker. I really appreciated it. The abortion pill, how dangerous is it really? Intermittent fasting, hungry for facts, Ozempic, anti-aging. These are all things that are going around on social media all over the place and in the news that students might want to know more about. And even if you don't use the episodes, the transcripts have the list of citations. So you might want to think about just checking those out. And Seeing Isn't Believing is a multimedia article by the Washington Post that goes through several different ways people manipulate information online. Ground News is a freemium source you can use that can help you do a lot of this stuff. It gives you, what I love about it, it'll look at your browsing habits if you get the paid version, and it will send you stories that you might not be paying attention to because they're outside of your filter bubble, which is really cool. But even the free version has some great stuff. So I'm out of time, so I'm going to stop. My contact info is here. Please do feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to talk about more of this stuff or share more of this stuff. And yeah, that's it. Thanks, everyone.
No, thank you. I'm a former newslet ambassador. And when you go through the training, you learn so much. And it's amazing what we're missing as educators and we're not showing these kids in preparation. So thank you for sharing this. And when he says the SIFT is the real bomb diggity, it is the bomb diggity. Register for the SIFT. It is so phenomenal. I think it comes down every Monday, right? Is it still every Monday afternoon?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I mean, it's great. It's a great way to start conversations with kids about news literacy, which is greatly needed. So again, thank you so much, Steve. Appreciate you. And you got the news literacy t-shirt on too. Yes, they know how to market. That's one thing I could say. They know how to market. Thanks again.